is using drones and fighter jets to bombard Al-Qaeda bases in the south. Well, as an eerie calm hangs over the capital Sana'a, is Yemen about to fall apart? A warm welcome to The World This Week with me, Phil Rees, where we look back at the last 7 days and find out what's really going on behind the headlines. Well, Saudi Arabia risks becoming the world's dumping ground for bloodthirsty despots, as Ali Abdullah Saleh of Yemen finds himself in a Riyadh hospital. He was wounded in an attack on the presidential compound. His condition, well, no one really knows. But he may find he has to stay there, like it or not. But supporters of the injured president today fired shots into the air in Sana'a to celebrate reports he would soon return. Well, who knows? The future of Yemen, that's our main story. In 25 minutes, human rights in the Muslim world. As Amnesty International celebrates its 50th anniversary, we ask whether rights are truly universal and whether Western countries apply human rights selectively to further their own colonial interests. But first, Yemen. Will Ali Abdullah Saleh return from his hospital bed? Some reports say he suffered 40% burns during the attack on the presidential compound on Sunday. After 33 years at the helm, he has repeatedly rejected international calls for him to step down, and in so ending the fighting that has grown out of months of pro-democracy protests. Meanwhile, in the power vacuum, the United States has intensified its covert war, striking at suspected Al-Qaeda bases with armed drones and fighter jets. The violence is transforming a largely peaceful uprising into a tribal conflict with many dimensions and no clear end in sight. Here's Nina Arif with an update.
Yemen's ruling party has opened talks with the country's main opposition coalition following the departure of President Ali Abdullah Saleh to Saudi Arabia for medical treatment. The 69-year-old was flown to the Saudi capital Riyadh following a rocket attack on his presidential palace on Friday, which officials say was an assassination attempt. Protesters have called on the acting president, Abdurrahman Mansour Hadi, to form a presidential council to seek a solution to the crisis in the country. The opening of talks with the country's main opposition coalition comes a day after thousands of government supporters held a rally outside the residence of the acting leader, demanding the formation of a transitional council to create a new government. Yemen has been rocked by months of protests and deepening violence. Saleh, who has ruled since 1978, has refused to leave office despite protests and a tribal uprising, which has brought the country to the brink of civil war and resulted in more than 350 deaths. Despite repeated promises to do so, unpopular President Saleh refused to accept a transitional plan brokered by the Saudi-led Gulf Cooperation Council. The weekend's development, which saw an injured Saleh fly to Riyadh for medical treatment, put Saudi Arabia in pole position to influence the outcome of the drama in Sana'a. Most experts believe that they will not let him go back.
Thank you, Nina Arif, with that report. So, what now for Yemen? I'm pleased to have in the studio Kate Nevis, who's in charge of the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House. We also have Dr. Mohamed Qubaty, who until a few months ago was an advisor to the Yemeni Prime Minister, but he's now with the opposition. And we're also joined on the phone from Sana'a by the journalist Iona Craig. Thank you all. Now, if I could start with you, Iona, in Sana'a. Wow, what's it like to be there? I mean, do you feel in great danger? I mean, is there a sense of a looming disaster or what?
There's a lot of anticipation at the moment of what's going to happen next, as everything is pretty uncertain now that Saleh has left, but the official stance is that he will be coming back. And certainly last night there was a bizarre display of so-called celebration, as we had heavy gunfire for at least 45 minutes the whole way across the city last night, in which up to 100 people were reportedly injured as the bullets fell down from the sky after guns were fired in the air. And then we had a 2.5-hour firework display throughout the night. So these are celebrations, reports that Ali Abdullah Saleh was recovering from his surgery in Saudi Arabia. And they say there are going to be more celebrations in a similar vein tonight, with much anticipation that by his supporters that he's certainly going to come back to Sana'a.
Well, I mean, obviously, Iona, I mean, you know, obviously you haven't had much sleep, which is one problem, but, I mean, the reports coming from the United States said that he had 40%, this is President Ali Abdullah Saleh, suffered 40% burns. Surely that makes it very difficult for him to return in any meaningful way.
Yes, possibly, although I'm very sceptical about some of these medical reports. Not getting any sort of direct details firsthand, we're hearing them from sort of third parties. It's difficult to know what's true and what's not true, and to what extent his injuries are. Obviously, immediately after the attack, we were given this audio report on state TV here. But yes, it's very hard to know exactly the extent of his injuries, and I think that his return will depend greatly upon the extent of those injuries, and as you mentioned before, the role of Saudi Arabia, who I'm sure will do as much as they can in their power to prevent him from returning.
Iona, thank you very much. Stay with us. We'll come back to you shortly. If we could turn to you, Kate Nevis. Yeah, I mean, is that your view that he will return or not? There seem to be real doubts in Sana'a at the moment.
I agree with Iona on this. We're looking at a situation where Saudi Arabia has been publicly calling for Saleh's step down over the recent weeks. They're not now going to renege on that, but I can't imagine that Saudi Arabia will facilitate Saleh's return to Yemen in any way.
Well, they'd need to do that, wouldn't they? But equally, well, he does have his supporters in Saudi Arabia, doesn't he? I mean, the various parts of the royal family.
I think at the moment it's difficult to tell where Saudi Arabia sit in terms of what they want to happen in Yemen. Saleh has always had his supporters, as have other factions within Yemen from Saudi Arabia.
Okay, Dr. Qubaty, I mean, as someone who's obviously close to the power there until a short time ago, I mean, do you think he's going to return? What's your gut instinct?
I think this is a sort of, again, one of the maneuvers which the regime, you know, trained by Ali Abdullah Saleh for the past 33 years. They're playing the same game. The world should not forget that we have been dealing with somebody who was quite devious, unpredictable, dishonest, untrustworthy, likes to play on the brink. He's very famous for his brinkmanship. And now this is another game. But I think the world knows that this is quite dangerous now again. The man has managed to outmaneuver a lot the GCC initiative. But now he's outside the country for one reason or another. I think there's a good chance now for the initiative, by its own original thoughts of trading in Saleh out
this is a deal, by the way, just remind viewers that Gulf Cooperation Council tried to bring in a peace deal that would involve the removal of Ali Abdullah Saleh and, crucially, members of his family from the security services that they run in a trade-off for immunity from prosecution. Now, you feel that now the Saudis are going to apply that?
I think it's a good chance now for them because he's outside. The rest of the deal, an amnesty could be, well, previously he wanted a sort of immunity. Now an amnesty could be issued for him if he wants, and the rest of the family have got to leave. The big question is now, we've got a vice president who is constitutionally should be running the country. Would he be allowed to run the country? Because if he's allowed to run the country, then the rest of the ideas of the GCC initiative could be implemented. We could start having a national unity government, and that national government would open the way.
But isn't there a problem, though? I mean, as it were, Daddy may be in Saudi Arabia, in hospital, injured, but all his sons and nephews are still running the key security apparatus, all the special forces, you know, Republican Guards. Well, I mean, how can they be removed just by discussion?
Well, here the sincerity of the Saudi position, and as well our friends in the West. By the way, Kate here is beside me. She's in the Chatham House Foundation, and we have got the group of Friends of Yemen, which was formed here in London some 18 months ago. And the main objective of this group was to try and prevent Yemen from turning into a failed state. We are now on the verge of that, and we don't see these regional partners and these global partners. They're sitting on their hands. We want them to see them effectively, managing the change there, so that it could move towards a peaceful transition of power.
Okay, well, let's turn back to Iona Craig, in Sana'a, Saudi Arabia is a key player now. Now, I mean, it's true over the years that the Saudis have almost regarded Yemen as a sort of subordinate state. I mean, do you think that they are prepared to hang on to, if I could use that phrase, hang on to Ali Abdullah Saleh in Riyadh without actually having a clear replacement or knowing who will be there? Because, you know, their main aim surely is just to have a stable nation there without the threat from Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, certainly their biggest issue is stability. Their greatest concern is obviously spreading chaos with millions of Yemenis trying to flee the country and across the border into Saudi Arabia. And also they have the threat of the northern Houthi rebels, which are based right along their border, who they've clashed with before. So certainly, yes, stability is their main aim. But at the moment, certainly the process, as you mentioned previously, is the Vice President taking over until elections can be held and pushing for some form of transition. The hope is that is going to create the stability rather than this continued unrest that we've had for 5 months. If President Ali Abdullah Saleh stays in the position that he's held for 33 years. There's no way of ending this crisis until he goes. So
do you see his family being purged from the security apparatus in all its manifestations?
This is obviously going to be a huge sticking point, and it is obviously something Saleh has probably deliberately done in order to give him a better position to negotiate now he's in Saudi Arabia, is to have his sons and extended family still here, still in command of those military units. It gives him a better position for negotiation of how he wants to move next.
And what about the other character? General Ali Mohsen, who, of course, is a much-hated rival of Ali Abdullah Saleh. What's he up to these days? There have been contradictory signals coming from his camp.
Certainly, I mean, his troops of the 1st Armoured Division basically hold control of most of the west of the capital at the moment, where they've been protecting protesters, and also beyond that immediate area, they've taken large stretches of road further northwest towards the airport and indeed further south. But Ali Mohsen al-Asma also has a better relationship with the Vice President through their military background together than obviously he does with Saleh now, since he defected and turned his back on him. So there is some potential for reconciliation there, but he obviously still has an opponent in Ahmed Saleh, Ali Abdullah Saleh's eldest son. So there are all these various elements that make this negotiation and this transition period very complicated here in Yemen, and potentially many stumbling blocks to fall along on the way.
Now, you actually mentioned armed Hutu rebels in the north. I mean, viewers obviously sometimes have a lot to take in. They're from a Shia offshoot, the Zaydis. It's a form of Shiism, and of course many of them are armed. And you've also got the ingredient of Al-Qaeda. Now, today the United States has stepped up fighter plane attacks, drone attacks very near to Aden, the port of Aden, to the east of there. I mean, how is that going to play into the whole picture, Iona?
Again, it's slightly unclear about what this so-called escalation by the US involves. It's very difficult to clarify that here and get confirmation that there have indeed been these airstrikes that are reported, which is only one, I hasten to add, that was last week. Drone strikes have certainly been used here in the last month for the first time in a long time. But also Al-Qaeda, which we know is a problem here, and it does certainly exist. But again, it has been something of a tool for Ali Abdullah Saleh, not only to gain money and financial backing from the West, but also during this unrest to stoke fears amongst his US and European sponsors, to frighten them into this feeling that there will be complete chaos and that Al-Qaeda will take over large parts of the country if they don't support him. So it's unclear at the moment, as I say, what those US strikes have or will entail. But certainly Al-Qaeda is the biggest concern of the West, and their main reason of trying to achieve stability here as well.
Iona Craig, thank you. To turn to you, Kate Nevins. I mean, do you think that Al-Qaeda is a real threat, or is this a kind of manufactured the tool that was used by the Ali Abdullah Saleh regime, and we know it was, to get resources from the West. US aid was doubled, for example, between 2009 2010. How serious a threat really is it?
Well, I think we're seeing both. Saleh has definitely made a lot of Al-Qaeda, and he has been receiving a lot of support through security assistance from the US for the last few years. All of this assistance has been going to his son and to his nephew, and they still remain in Sana'a. Now, if we're going to see some kind of power shift because of Saleh's departure to Riyadh, the US are definitely going to have to renegotiate those relationships. I don't think there's a question of whether Al-Qaeda do exist, but I do think there's a question of where our balance is. Do we provide, does the UK government provide support towards security assistance, or do we actually look at one of the fundamental problems in Yemen, which is the legitimacy of the forms of government?
Well, how popular is Al-Qaeda, do you think? Does it have, after all, Osama bin Laden's family has Yemeni roots. Do you think that Al-Qaeda has a genuine sort of popular backing there for their sort of lifestyle, very, very pure Islamist, values?
I think it's definitely worth noting that all of the major incidents that we've seen emanating from Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula in the last year and a half have actually involved foreign nationals. They have not involved Yemenis. And I think there's this idea that the Western governments can contain Al-Qaeda within spaces, but actually you're looking at a movement that is not containable anymore. We have messages that can be passed through lots of different mediums. We have people travelling to Yemen, travelling out of Yemen. We have foreign nationals being trained in Yemen, foreign nationals being trained in Somalia. I don't feel like that this is a Yemen-specific issue.
Dr. Qubaty, do you think that Al-Qaeda, let me put that question here, has some kind of support there? It's a very kind of corrupt-free, rather, sort of pure values that it has as an organization. Do you think it has a grassroots support?
We don't deny that there are, some elements of Al-Qaeda there have been, but I think that this Al-Qaeda issue has been blown out of proportion completely. Ali Abdullah Saleh, as previously, he managed to make Al-Qaeda his number one fundraiser, as you have noted. So he didn't want to get rid of them. Any new government which comes with that position, we have tried to assure our friends in the West, this regime will be fighting and confronting Al-Qaeda, head-on collision. So there's no way.
But they did take the town of, I think, Zanzibar last week, didn't they?
You see, this is the thing. Ali Abdullah Saleh, these people who took the town of Zanzibar, they are not the Al-Qaeda people. Al-Qaeda would have no, it's none of their objective to sort of have an area which they have liberated and to stay there, because it's the wrong tactic for them. These are few of Muslim, fundamentalists who have been in relation with the regime for a long time ago. If you go back to 8 months ago, one of the reporters of The Guardian, that Ghaith Gad, he reported this. He was in Jar, in this town, and he met the number 2 man, and he told him, last week I was with the president in the palace. So these are a group of people who are Islamic fundamentalists, have been used by Ali Abdullah Saleh just to threaten the West all the time. I think the issue of Al-Qaeda is not there, and I think the Americans and the Westerners now do realize that this is not the big issue now. The big issue is stability in the country, because there are other players, as you have mentioned, the Houthis, the Southern Secessionist movement, and everybody there. And if Abdullah Saleh comes back or stays in power through his sons, this is a recipe for disaster. The country will go into conflict again, and the country could disintegrate into many pieces, and then I think the Saudis, who are, as they are now, they are calling the shots, will pay a lot for it, because if we in Yemen have received 1 million refugees who came across the sea, the Gulf of Aden from Somalia, then the Saudis, I think, and our partners in the GCC should expect millions of Yemenis moving, especially the Saudis. So it's trading in for which is best for them, to see stability in Yemen and to sort of push Ali Abdullah Saleh and convince him that he should sign now, and his sons to be outside. And then there is a lot of leverage you can be used on these nephews and sons of Ali Abdullah Saleh. They are criminals of war. They have killed 500 people since the initiative when Ali Abdullah Saleh reneged from signing the document. They have killed 500 people. So if enough leverage is used on them, we haven't seen.
Should they gain amnesty for the sake of peace?
Well, it could be given, but at the same time, you've got to use the stick and the carrot at the same time. But we're not using the stick at all. Show them that really, if we start, if there is movement towards freezing their assets outside, if there is movement towards some sort of pressure on them, if the humanitarian file is moved in the United Nations Human Rights Council, if there is some movement inside the United Nations Security Council, we have never seen those leverages being used on Yemen at all. And then these people will come to their senses and they'll go a bit back.
Okay, I mean, obviously, the West has supported this man 33 years. Ali Abdullah Saleh has been in power. The West's record in the Middle East, quite frankly, is appalling in terms of denial, democracy supporting regimes in that way. I mean, what should it do now in Yemen? I mean, in your view, what should the West stance be and who should it support?
Well, I think it's worth thinking about the fact that the departure of Saleh is not the end of Yemen's troubles. Even if he was to have signed the GCC deal, we have a very large pro-democracy group of protesters led by the youth movement who would not be happy with that as a solution.
Well, they started it off, of course, but also, unlike these other people, they don't have guns, though, do they? I mean, in that sense.
No, but I think we are looking at a window of opportunity where there's two things happening. We've got rivalries between elite power factions who are fighting, but you are seeing a rising youth movement who will have to be considered when there is a political settlement in Yemen. They will have to consider these young people because they represent one of the largest proportions of the population in the country, but also because their grievances are real. I mean, you've also got an economy that's failing, you've got very, very high unemployment. Whoever inherits Yemen will have to address these problems, and the youth movement are proving themselves to be incredibly organised, incredibly impressive, and they are putting forward real solutions, real policy solutions for Yemen.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Qubaty, we're coming to the end quite quickly. I mean, viewers might not know there have been thousands of young people camped outside Presidential Palace, Vice Presidential Palace, amazing people. Do you think they will be overlooked at the end of the day and a gunfight will emerge, or do you think their voice will emerge?
Their voice will be there, because these people have known how to work now. I mean, they will get back. If anybody by any means comes, and a regime new formed, and it ignores their actual objectives, I think they will be back in the streets.
Okay, final word to Sana. Iona Craig, I mean, you may have heard that. I mean, do you feel that given the fact that a lot of those protesters, the people who started this whole thing, since they're not armed, will their voice still be heard at the end of the day, or will there be a bit of violence at sidelines in your view?
I think it's essential that their voice is heard, otherwise this unrest isn't going to end. Essentially, before all this tribal fighting started in the north of the city here, and other violence broke out, the crisis here was the protests, and they were peaceful protests. And I think the protests are not going to give up until their goals have been achieved. And certainly even since Ali Abdullah Saleh has left the country in the last few days, it's not as if any of these people are packing up their tents and leaving thinking they've achieved what they set out to do. They know there's still a long way to go. They know they've still got a lot to achieve, but they will keep protesting and maintain their position until they achieve what they set out to when they started these protests in February.
Iona Craig, thank you very much for joining us. You stay safe there in Sana'a, won't you, whatever unfolds in the coming days. Well, we're coming to a short break, so it's a big thank you to everyone. Coming up in the second half, we look at human rights. Are they a Western creation, or can there be universal values? Stay with us.